Chodesh Tov to everyone. Let's start. Today's daf is Sotah daf Kaf Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran Zoom family in loving memory of the beloved father of their dear Hadran learner and friend, Adina Hajej, Rav Dov Shabtai ben Yehoshua Lev ve'etel Zichrono Levracha. May his family be comfort among Avalei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. Through his kind, wise, and constantly thoughtful daughter, it is evident that Rabbi Greenstone was a special person who transmitted his values, his heritage. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Today's daf is sponsored by Rachel Chefetz in loving memory of her mother, Hannah Cohen. Hannah ben Harav Moshe and Tzipora Mashbaum on her second yurtzeit, a model to generations of Mashbaum and Cohen families with her grace, modesty, inspiration for the importance of family, and exuberant and unconditional love. Mommy, you are greatly missed by us all. Today's daf is sponsored by Yael Asher in memory of her husband, Shlomo Chaim Asher ben Luna Sol Zichrono Levracha. Okay, we started our Mishna yesterday, the first part having nothing really to do with the second part. The first part we finished, which was all about, and the Gemara is actually not going to deal with it because we've dealt with it at all different points, about whether or not the zchuyot of this woman will prevent, any merit she has will prevent the waters from starting to kill, or from killing her right in the spot, or whether it doesn't prevent and she actually will die right on the spot if she is guilty. Talk about the issues for each of those opinions. Then we went into, and we're going to actually finish with this topic, the third chapter today, which is what if the mincha gets disqualified, and what are cases where the mincha gets burned in this area called the beit hadeshen on the floor next to the altar and not on the altar itself. So what cases would it be disqualified? And I want to remind you that the mincha has two parts, and we'll deal a lot with this today. The mincha is a batch of dough, basically, that then you take, the kohen puts his three middle fingers, takes out what we call the kometz, or he does a kometz, and he takes out that middle a little bit. That part goes on the altar, and the rest of it, usually in a normal mincha, gets eaten by the kohanim. So now we're going to talk about cases where perhaps all of the mincha gets burned on the beit hadeshen because it's disqualified, like we saw yesterday, which is once it's already, the mincha is already sanctified in the vessel, and you put it in this kli kodesh, where it already, the itself is sanctified, we say kedushat haguf, then it's a point of no return. It's already sanctified. You can't redeem that sanctity, which you could do before it's in the vessel. Once that happens, that whole batch of dough is ruined, that mincha offering, and you have to burn it in the beit hadeshen, okay? Because it can't go on the altar, but it also can't be just eaten or something like that because it has sanctity to it. Now we're going to talk about other cases where the mincha gets burned, and then we're going to get to some more other details. Elu, the last three words on kaf bet and bet, elu sheminchotehem nisrapo. These are other cases where the mincha gets burned. So the first case we had was it gets impure, okay? A kohen comes into the temple, he becomes impure somehow, and then he touches it, something like that. It would get burned. But now we have other cases where the minchat sotah will never end up being burned on the altar, and they end up just having, it's disqualified. They have to burn it in this beit hadeshen area. That's where, by the way, they would put all the extra ashes. They would clean the ashes. Remember the trumat hadeshen, right? Trumat hadeshen. So also the deshen goes there, right? That's what this place is for. Ha'omeret tme'a ani lecha. What if she says, I am impure? Meaning she admits her guilt. So remember, if we've already sanctified in the kli sharet, the mincha offering, but we haven't yet brought it, so at that point, there's no point to go forward with the process. Process ends right there. So again, goes to the beit hadeshen. V'sheba'u edim she'itme'a. What if witnesses come and said that she's impure? And then again, we have proof. The sotah process is only because we have a doubt here. Now there's no doubt. So again, it gets burned. Okay, these are two different cases. She says, I don't want to drink the water, so I don't want to go ahead with the process. I'd rather just remember what's her option. Get divorced, lose my k'tuba money, but better that than drink these sotah waters, even if I'm innocent. Or we don't know. Maybe she's guilty. For whatever reason, she doesn't want to drink it, but she doesn't want to admit her guilt. Or the husband decides he doesn't want to go through it. Remember, the whole process can only happen if the husband is taking her. And if he decides, you know what, I changed my mind, so he can stop the process. Another issue, we haven't yet seen inside why this all is, but if the husband's not allowed to have relations with her once he accuses her, once the stira happens, So once that happens, he's not allowed to sleep with her. If he does, then basically the reason is because he's in the wrong. And when he's in the wrong, also we don't go through the Sotah process. And that is learned out from a pasuk. We'll get to that later on. This is the case that we're going to mainly deal with today. Anyone who's married to a kohen, minchotehem nisrafot. Their mincha gets burned. Now, what are we talking about here? And what part of the mincha and what happens? This isn't disqualified just because someone's married to a kohen. So the issue is, there's a pasuk, and it's on your sheet toward the bottom of the second side. There's a pasuk that says, here, I'll read it. I'll pull it up right now. Read it inside. If you go down to toward the bottom, Vayikra Perek Vav pasuk tet zayin, kol minchat kohen kalil tihiyeh lo te'achel. That means that whenever, now actually the context there is a voluntary mincha offering. If you decide you want to bring a voluntary offering to the temple and you don't have a lot of money, so you could bring a voluntary meal offering. It's the cheapest way to bring an offering to God. So if you're a normal person who does that, we do the same thing we've been talking about, all the menachot. So you take the kometz, you burn that on the altar, and the shirayim get eaten by the kohanim, the remainder. But that's only if the person bringing the offering is not a kohen. If the kohen brings a voluntary offering to the temple, and perhaps also an obligatory offering like a minchat sotah, we'll talk about that soon. If a kohen brings it, so it's just a totally different system. There is no kometz because we take the entire thing and we burn it on the altar. Okay, that's just the rule. Why it is, we don't know, but that's what the pasuk says. If a kohen is to bring a mincha, forget kometz, forget that. We take the entire thing and it gets offered, as opposed to, right, a normal person, we offer a little bit of it and the rest gets eaten by the kohen. Kohen himself has to offer the entire thing. It's like a korban olah versus a shlamim, right, where the olah gets entirely burnt. A shlamim, the owners eat part of the meat. Here it's different because the kohen will eat it if it's, a regular person who brings it. But in any case, they say the following. So what's our case? We now have anyone who's married to a kohen, kohanim, minchotehem nisrafot. Now, when we mean their mincha, we don't mean the entire mincha, which is what we meant a few minutes ago, right? All the other cases where we burn the whole thing. So it became tameh, something happened. Now we have a case where a woman married to a kohen, it doesn't matter what her status is, whether she's a bat kohen or a bat Yisrael, or it doesn't make a difference. She is married to a kohen. Her mincha, theoretically, we should do the kometz, and the kometz burnt on the altar, and the rest goes to the kohanim. But since she's married to a kohen, which means basically this mincha is really a joint offering between her, with her and her husband, they both bring it. He's the owner of it, really, because remember, she doesn't even own her own things. Well, it's partly hers, partly his. So that makes it very complicated, because if it's hers entirely, the shirayim get eaten by the kohanim. If it's his entirely, the whole thing gets burned, and there are no shirayim, and certainly they're not eaten by the kohanim. So we do this in between. We take the kometz, we burn it on the altar, and then the shirayim get burned in the beit hadeshen, because they're kind of disqualified because we don't really know what to do with them. This is going to be the main focus of our shiur for today. Bat Yisrael sheniseit lekohen minchatan nisrefet. Okay, this is really not necessary to have added this line, but they're basically pointing out anyone who's married to a kohen, okay? They just said kol nisuot. Well, this is kind of adding. Probably they're bringing this to foil it with the next case, or to say, that's a different case. But right now they're saying if we have a daughter of a regular person who's married to a kohen, so what we just said a minute ago is what's going to be the case. But a kohenet sheniseit liYisrael minchatan echelet. And by the way, the Rashi says that we're talking about all menachot that are with women married to kohanim, not even necessarily just the Sotah. A kohenet, what's a kohenet? The daughter of a kohen. The daughter of a kohen that's married to a Yisrael, her mincha would be eaten, meaning that would be like a regular korban mincha of, whether it's a Sotah or whether it's a regular woman, because again, this daughter of a kohen, these laws of the mincha of a kohen being burnt entirely aren't relevant to her, because they're only relevant to male kohanim. So if she's married to a kohen, anybody, it doesn't matter who she is, married to a kohen, the extras get burnt. If regular woman or even bat kohen, any woman, doesn't matter, married to a Yisrael, then the shirayim get eaten by the kohanim. Okay, because it all goes by the man, not the woman. Now already, if we're going to be saying this, there's a difference between a kohen and a bat kohen. Okay, me, for example, who's a bat kohen, and my brothers. Right, this is a major difference between the two of us. And in case you're curious, which I'm always curious about these things, so the Mishna is also curious and wants to know, ma ben kohen kohenet. What laws apply only to the male kohanim and not to female kohanim? What are differences in the law between, not even apply to men and not women, also apply to women and not men? In other words, what are the differences between a bat kohen and a male kohen, a ben kohen, we call him? They just call him a kohen, right? And a kohen and a kohenet. Okay, generally we use the term bat kohen. In the Gemara, the Mishna uses the term kohenet, like a kohen and a female kohen. Minchat kohen ne'echelet, uminchat kohen ena ne'echelet. So right now, this is what we just learned. The mincha of a kohen goes entirely up, burns entirely. Mincha of a bat kohen, though, gets eaten. The remainder, again, the kometz obviously gets burnt on the altar, like any mincha, and the remainder gets eaten by the kohanim. It's just like a regular mincha. Kohenet mitchalelet, the kohen ein mitchalel. If a bat kohen marries someone she's not supposed to marry, or even engages in sexual relations with someone she's forbidden to, let's say a Gentile, or right, a mamzer, or something like that, she is mitchalelet. We actually had a whole thing about this in Yavama, even perhaps if she sleeps with a halal. I'm not sure if everyone agrees with that, but I think that already turns her into a halala, meaning she can no longer marry a kohen. Whether she's married to him, whether she engaged in relations with him, there's certain things, relations that she could have that entirely disqualify her for the rest of her life from marrying a kohen. So while we know that a kohen can't marry a divorcee, can't marry a woman who did chalitza, and a gioret, he also can't, and a zonah, he also can't marry a woman who had sex with one of these psulei chitun. Okay, that messes her up forever. Okay, or if she married them, obviously. So a forbidden or a problematic relationship between her and someone could mess her up for marrying a kohen, but, which by the way is not just for kohen. This isn't even a bat kohen. This is any woman, okay? But it's going to end up being a difference between a female kohen and a male kohen. Because if this is a female kohen, okay, like I said, it could be anybody. A bat Yisrael who engaged in relations with one of those people also can't marry a kohen. But a kohen ein mitchalel. Now, what does this mean, a kohen ein mitchalel? What this basically means, and then we're going to get into some minor differences of opinion about this, but a kohen who marries a divorcee, who would also be having a relation that messes him up, okay? He's not allowed to do that. He actually does not become a halal. A halal is someone who can't marry a kohen, right? Grusha zonah v'chalala lo yikach, right? A kohen can't marry a halala. And a halal, a male halal, can't work in the temple. They're disqualified from work in the temple and all sorts of other things. They basically, for all intents and purposes, are not a kohen. So now, if a kohen marries a divorcee, which is not allowed for him to do, or any of the women he's not allowed to, it doesn't turn him into a halal, because what does the pasuk say? Lo yechalel zara'o ba'amav. It says the kohen shouldn't marry these women so that he not desecrate his children. So from there they learn, it only messes up your child. So a child of a marriage between a divorcee and a kohen is a halal. But, and this sounds absurd, the kohen himself, who did the sin and did something wrong, is not actually a halal. The big question is, what does it mean he's not a halal? Okay, and this is one of the things that always confuses us in terms of this. What do you mean he's not a halal? Like he did something wrong, he married, he can still, right now, in those days, it was work in the temple. In our day, it's go up, right, and do birkat kohanim, the blessing of the kohanim, or get the first aliyah, for example. So now you might say, right, people talk about this. What if this happens often nowadays? So if a kohen marries a divorcee, we generally say he doesn't duchen, okay? He doesn't go up to birkat kohanim. So it says here, though, he's not mitchalel. Therefore, how do they explain it? What it means in Yom Chalel is the way the woman messes herself up forever. This one relationship she has, right? Whether it's a marriage or whether it's a intercourse one time, it messes her up for the rest of her life. A kohen marries a divorcee. While he's married to her, he cannot do the priestly blessing. He cannot, right? All the things that relate to kohanim are not relevant to him. But as soon as he divorces her, if she dies and he's no longer married to her, he goes back to being a normal kohen. Very interesting. He's not a halal. Now, there's a debate between the way people understand the Rambam. There's actually some sort of contradiction in the Rambam and the way Tosfot. Tosfot says that, okay, some people understand the Rambam is that law is a Torah law, that while he's married to her, he is a halal by Torah law in the sense that he can't work in the temple. It's only once she dies or he divorces her that he can go back. But Tosfot says this is really just a knas. It's a penalty the rabbis put upon him. But by Torah law, he's really, really not a halal, which is fascinating to think about. Again, it's troublesome, right? You did something wrong, and yet you're not treated as a halal, only your son is. It's very weird. But there's clearly this distinction, and the question is, how far does the distinction go? Is it a complete distinction? He doesn't get penalized at all, and only the rabbi penalized him because they said this is ridiculous, which is also interesting. If we say the rabbis penalized him, it makes a lot of sense. The rabbi said this is an absurdity, and we have to fix it, right? It can't possibly be that he goes out scot-free and he's all good and his son can't do anything, but he's fine. So anyway, it's an interesting deliberation or debate about what this means to kohen no mitchalel. Okay, moving on. Other differences between a male and a female kohen. Kohenet mitamal metim. Daughter of a kohen can go to a cemetery and become impure to dead people. But in kohen mitamal metim. But we know that kohanim cannot. As I told you, in the Gemara, we're going to go through where they get this from all the psukim. Although, as you're going to see, the drashot could go either way often in many of the cases. And probably it's that they knew this was the halacha and tried to connect it to psukim. Next, kohen ochel b'kodshei kodashim. There's all sorts of korbanot that the kohanim get. For example, the chatat, or we talked about the shirayim, all these things. Anything that has high-level sanctity, there's kodshe kodshim and kodshem kalim, anything high-level sanctity goes to the male kohanim only. Ein kohenet ochel b'kodshei kodashim. She can't eat that high-level sanctity. In other words, again, it's these particular things that it says in the Torah, they go to the kohen. Kohen means male, kohen not female. Ma bin ish li'isha. This is a funny kind of question. What are the differences between men and women? Now, you're not going to get, okay, what are the differences between men and women, right? That's an age-old question. But in this context, what it means is, well, if already we're talking about differences between male kohanim and female kohanim, let's talk about differences in the law between males and females in general. From here, we're going to get to our parsha, which is nice, that we're going to read tomorrow in Shul. This is a law by a leper. A leper, there's a law that the leper needs to tear their clothing and walk around, it seems, in tattered garments, however you understand that, and porea his hair. So what does it mean lifroa se'ar? There's a debate about it, but we're going to understand it right now, that he's supposed to grow his hair. Can't cut his hair, kind of like the Nazir. Okay, now we had a whole thing about hair in the Mitzvah, but that was more that he needs to cut his hair. Remember, when he becomes, or he or she needs to cut their hair when they are healed, and then 7 days later, remember? But this is a different law that we didn't discuss, which is all that time that they're not supposed to be cutting their hair. But this is not true for the woman. She doesn't walk around in tattered clothing or doesn't need to tear her clothes at all, and she doesn't need to grow her hair long. This is a review of some halachot that we saw in Nazir. A father can make his son into a Nazir. He can take upon Nazirut for his son, but a mother cannot do that for her son. Okay, even though Hannah did that for Shmuel, and they ask, how could she have done that? But according to the halacha, no, she does not do that. Ha'ish migalech al Nazirut aviv, ve'ein ha'isha migalachat al Nazirut aviv. A man can take, now you might remember this case, the father said, I'm going to be a Nazir, and set aside sacrifices already for ending his Nazirut. Then the son comes along, let's say the father dies, and the son says, I want to be a Nazir. There were different interpretations of what this case is, but we'll go with the basic one, the main one, which is the son says, I want to be a Nazir like my father, and I'm going to take upon Nazirut on condition that I use the animals that he set aside. So normally you can't use animals that were set aside for someone else's korban, but his son is allowed to do that with his father's sacrifices. However, a woman, a daughter, is not allowed to do that with her father's sacrifices. This is very good because this is a review of all sorts of things we've learned in different cases. You might remember miyun. Remember miyun from Yevamot and Ketubot? It's where a woman is betrothed by her mother or brother because her father is not alive anymore or is not able to do it or whatever it might be. They betrothed her. Her betrothal, if you remember, is only rabbinic. A father can betroth his daughter when she's a minor, and it has validity by Torah law. But if a mother or brother does it, it doesn't have validity by Torah law, only by rabbinic law. So it is a betrothal, but only by rabbinic law. That enables the woman, when she becomes of age, to say, I'm not interested in marrying this man, and just walks off without any divorce needed or anything. That's because of this halacha, that a man can betroth his daughter, but a woman can't by Torah law. Okay, it doesn't mean she can't entirely. She can. Again, what does it mean to betroth? She accepts the betrothal from someone else for the daughter. She basically says, oh, right, again, oftentimes these were shiduchim, as they say in the meaning not of, okay, let's set up this person with that, but let's arrange the marriage and agree to the marriage even without the daughter being part of the whole scenario. So a father's allowed to do that legally for his daughter, but a mother cannot. Ha'ish mocher et bito. A father can sell his daughter to be a slave. Okay, there was slavery in those days. That father would sell the daughter with the hopes usually that the owner or the son of the owner would marry her. And if he doesn't, when she becomes of age, then she goes free at that point. It was, usually they did it out of poverty. But ein ha'isha mocheret et bita, but a woman can't sell her daughter to be a slave. Ha'ish niskal aron ve'ein ha'isha niskelet aruma. When it comes to giving the punishment of skila, stoning, the man is naked and the woman is not naked. We actually talked about this also with the Sotah, because remember, there was a difference of opinion. There were two contradictions between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, and what they said here and what they said there. I think it was Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, if I remember correctly, that by the Sotah, it was the opposite that they held by when it came to skila. Ha'ish nitle ve'ein ha'isha nitle. The husband is hung. After you kill him, he gets hung up. This is when you get the court-imposed death penalty. But the women are not hung. Okay, there's a debate about whether women are hung or not. Some say she is, and just she faces the tree and he faces out, something like that. But anyway, according to this opinion, the woman is not hung at all. Ha'ish nimkar b'gnevato, last halach of the Mishna. The man is sold into slavery if he can't pay a theft. He stole money. He doesn't have the money to pay back. Let's say he used it already, or he stole whatever, an object, and he sold it and he doesn't have any money to pay back. So he gets sold to be a slave. That's how you have Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave. But a woman is not sold to be a slave if she can't pay for a theft. Now the Gemara starts. And we're really going to deal in the Gemara mainly with, before we get to all these cases and what the source is, but we're going to now deal with the one case of a woman married to a kohen and what happens to her mincha. So if you remember, we learned we have this problem. The woman's married to a kohen. Okay, let's just view it as the Sotah case. And she brings this minchat Sotah, but it's really also he's the owner of it. Since he's the kohen and it's supposed to be all entirely burned, but hers is not supposed to be entirely burned. Her shirayim are supposed to be by the kohen. So we're a little bit stuck. What do? We do take a kmitza as if it's the woman's, right? Because the man, it would just be entirely burnt. But the shirayim, we end up burning in the beit hadeshen. This braita is going to say something a little different. It starts off sounding exactly the same, but we're going to understand nisrafim, and this is part of the problem with nisrafim. Nisrafim could mean two things. Nisrafim could mean burned in the beit hadeshen, right? This extra part, we burn it, like it's ruined, so all we can do is burn it. Like any kind of sanctified item that gets ruined, you burn. Or it could mean burnt on the altar, and that's where we get into some confusion here. So Tanu Rabbanit, kol hanisuot lekohanim minchotehem nisrafot. Anyone married to a kohen, their mincha gets burned. Ketzad, how does this work? Well, kohenet leviyavi Yisraeli. Okay, it doesn't matter what her status is, what her genealogy, what her status in society is. Is she a kohen levi Yisrael? Sheniset lekohen, she's married to a kohen. Ein minchatan echelet, and here the braita explains it a little bit better. It doesn't get eaten, the shirayim, the remainder. Mipnei sheyesh lo chelek ba, because he has a part in it. And he's a kohen, and his shirayim are not supposed to be eaten. But eina ola, well, he doesn't even have a remainder, but remember, none of it's supposed to be eaten. But eina ola kalil, but it can't be burnt entirely. They're describing exactly the problem we've been discussing, which it should be because it belongs to a kohen, mipnei sheyesh la chelek ba, because she has a part of it, and her mincha, that's not supposed to have in her mincha. Ela, so what do? Now again, according to our Mishna, what do? We burn the kometz on the altar, and the shirayim get burnt in the beit hadeshen, not on the altar. But here it says, Ela hakometz karev be'atzmo, v'shirayim krevim be'atzman. It sounds like the kometz gets burnt on the altar normally. And then the remainder also gets burnt on the altar. Why do we think this means burnt on the altar? Because it's karev. Karev means like korban. It's brought close to where? To the altar, not on the beit hadeshen. So this braita seems to be saying it gets burnt on the altar also. To which the Gemara immediately says, we have a halachic problem with this. Okay, what's the problem? To understand the problem, we're going to read first these psukim, okay, that I brought on your sheet. So in Vayikra Perek Bet, we're here, the bottom of the first sheet. Vayikra chapter 2, it says, and here we're just talking about minachot in general. Kol minchat shetakrivu laHashem, any mincha you do, lo te'aseh chametz, can't be chametz, it's always matzah type thing, unleavened. You cannot burn any leavened item or any honey on the altar. And then it says, Korban Reshit Takrivu Otam LaHashem. First Korban you sacrifice to God. But they shouldn't be burned on the altar of the Reach Nichach. We'll get back to that pasuk in a minute, or in a few minutes. So now, what does this say? The context here is a mincha. Okay, that's true. But we're going to take, and it has to do with not putting leavened items or honey on the altar. But we're going to take these last 5 words of the pasuk totally out of context. The halacha is going to say, Lo taktiru mimenu ishel Hashem, is coming to give some other forbidden thing. Okay, this is probably it would come in the category of what you call a lav shebichlalo. It's a lo taseh that means 2 things. It means, number 1, you cannot burn seor and dvash on the altar. But it also means, now we're going to read it inside, Ikri kan kol shehu mimenu leishim hareu bebal taktiru. This is the drasha that comes out of the pasuk. Because it says mimenu ishel Hashem, we're going to learn that what is this? You could have just said lo taktiru. You could have just said period, lo taktiru, end of pasuk, right? Any seor and dvash don't burn on the altar. Lo taktiru means burn on the altar. Why do you have to say from it, which first of all is a weird, from what? And Ishel Hashem, a fire to God. You can't make a fire to God of it. Now, you would have known that all without saying those words. So they say that this comes to mean, this is some other halacha that's learned out, not here. They're just quoting it here. Anything that mimenu went Ishel Hashem, which basically means anything that from it, you took some of it and you burnt it on the altar, which is exactly our case. We had a dough. We took some of it, the kometz, we burnt it on the altar. Lo taktiru. Don't burn from the rest of it on the altar. Okay? That means if I've taken something that was sanctified and part of it went on the altar, I am no longer allowed to take the rest of it and put it on the altar. Now, probably the logic here is it's a remainder, right? That's what we call it, the shirayim. It's like second best. So if it's already put in the second best category, the best obviously went on the altar, only the best goes on the altar. What was left over is left over, not appropriate to burn it on the altar. So how could you possibly say, remember, the mincha of the kohen that's supposed to be burnt entirely on the altar gets burnt as one thing. We never take some, take the other, although maybe we'll see later that we do. But right now we're going to understand, we don't ever separate them and burn one and then burn the rest. No, we burn the whole thing as one unit. So how can you possibly say, or when a woman's married to a kohen, we're going to take the kometz, burn it on the altar, and then take the shirayim and burn them on the altar? There's a halachic problem with that. It says, again, kol shehu mimenu, right, ikri kan, meaning we can call this exactly this case, which is forbidden, which is kol shehu mimenu lishim. Once part of it went on the fire, harehu b'val taktiru, the rest of it is forbidden to burn. So now we're stuck. The braita makes no sense. How can you possibly burn the kometz? To which they answer, we're going to have 2 answers to this question, because one is going to make sense only according to someone's opinion. And then we're going to say, well, according to those who disagree with him, what are we going to do? So the first answer is, Amar Yehuda Berei de Rabbi Shimon ben Pasi, Dimasik luhu l'shem etzim, l'shum etzim, ki Rabbi Eliezer. You can put them, how do you burn the shirayim? We don't burn them like we normally burn something on the altar, where we just kind of offer it onto the altar. But we say we're putting this as firewood on the altar. Right, things are flammable, and right, they help the fire go. We're putting in you do this trick. It's a loophole. You say, I'm putting it on the altar for we want to get it burnt on the altar in the end, but we're not allowed to. So what do? We say we're using it as firewood, and then you can put it on the altar. In the end, I've achieved what I wanted, which is I got it on the altar, and yet I'm not going against this isur of bal taktiru, don't burn something where already part of it was burnt. Because to use as firewood, that's actually allowed, at least according to some people. So they say, like Rabbi Eliezer says, Titanias, it says in a braita, Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Now that comes from the next pasuk. So the next pasuk, again, we're not darshaning the simple reading of this pasuk, we're darshaning the drasha on this. The next pasuk says at the end of the pasuk, Elam mizbeach lo ya'alu l'reach nichach. Now, if you take this drasha of lo taktiru mimenu v'shel Hashem, means something, the part of it was burnt, you can't take the rest of it and burn it. So the next pasuk says, don't put them on the altar for a reach nichach. What's a reach nichach? For a beautiful smell, for the purposes of burning them for an offering. But as long as you do it for the purposes of wood to burn, that's fine, right? To use it as firewood. So the reach nichach yatamale, Rabbi Eliezer says, but you can use it as firewood. So the Gemara says, as I told you before, Hani Chala Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, well, that only works according to Rabbi Eliezer. And then we could explain the braita as being according to him. They get burnt, right? You burn the shirayim, in this case of the minchat sotah, or any mincha offering that the wife of a kohen brings, right? Again, it's not necessarily only the sotah, but any offering, mincha offering, the whole thing gets burnt in two parts, and the second part gets burnt with the intent of being firewood. But, right, so, but how can you explain it according to the rabbis? To which they answer, okay. Now we need a whole bunch of background, and for this we have the second part of today's daf, which is in Vayikra chapter 5. It talks about someone who needs to bring minchat hoteh. Okay, it talks about someone who sinned. It's a korban levi yored, a sliding scale offering. They can't afford the animal, they can't afford the birds. So in Pasuk Yud Aleph it says, if you can't afford any of those, then you bring a mincha. This is called a minchat hoteh. It's very similar to the sotah because it's also a mincha of a sinner rather than a voluntary mincha offering. And then, now, the mincha offering where we talked about that the kohen gets burnt entirely is actually said about a voluntary offering. So at the end of this section about the mincha offering of a sinner, it says, and the kohen repents, right? He does this whole thing right? He brings the mincha on the altar for a regular person. And then it says, "Vaital kohen kimincha." Now, this is a bit of a strange pasuk. What does that mean? To which they darshan in Masechet Menachot, it says, what does this mean? V'haya the kohen kimincha. So Tanakama says, "Makish chovato l'nidvato." Okay, here I brought you the Gemara in Menachot, the Mishna. Must be a braita, I'm guessing. It's to say, "La kohen kimincha" comes to teach you that if a kohen were to be the one bringing this minchat hoteh, his sin offering is just like the voluntary offering, and the laws would be the same. And what would you do with the mincha? And this is what we assumed until now, that the mincha offering of a kohen sinner is exactly like the mincha offering of his voluntary one. That's what it means. Ha-kohen, like the mincha of a voluntary offering, and it would have to be entirely burned. That's Tanakam. Rabbi Shimon says, no, and I'm not going to go into why he says this, but he understands it differently. He says, it says like a mincha, which he doesn't say like his mincha. That's what it should have said. So he says, what does it come to say? It says, well, his mincha is like a mincha of a Yisrael, but it's not exactly like the mincha of a Yisrael. Okay, what does he say in the end? He says, in the end, I'm just not going to go through all the details, but he said the kometz karev ba'atzmo v'shirayim krevim ba'atzmam. Remember, the regular mincha of a kohen of voluntary gets burnt entirely. According to Rabbi Shimon, we do separate the kmitza, and the kometz gets sacrificed, and the shirayim gets sacrificed. Okay? Again, we have a problem with that about the yishim. I'm not going to get into that because we're really not dealing with Rabbi Shimon today. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says a third option. You separate it, because again, it's like the mincha, but not, it's sort of like the mincha of Yisrael, but it's also like the mincha of a kohen. So how do we deal with it? Well, the kometz, you do separate, you take the kometz out, and you separate from the shirayim, as opposed to, again, the voluntary offering, which all gets burned. But the kometz gets burned, karev batzmo, v'shirayim mitpazrin al beit hadeshen. What do we do with the shirayim? This is just like what we saw in our Mishna. The shirayim get burned, but not burnt on the altar. They get burnt in that area called the beit hadeshen. So what they're going to say now is when the words in the braita said, "Hashirayim krevim ba'atzmam," and we thought that meant they get burnt on the altar. It's not true. It's not what the braita meant. The braita actually doesn't contradict our Mishnah. It actually means they get burnt like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says, we're going to read it now, to Avdelek Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. You do with it like he says, which is to Tanya Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Omer. Now the Gemara is quoting that Gemara in that braita in Menachot. Kometz karev ba'atzmo b'shirayim mitpazerim al beit hadeshen. Okay, and now we're going to basically say for the minchat sotah of this kohen, we're going to do what he says happens to the minchat of a kohen in general, who's a sinner, which is the shirayim karev ba'atzman means burnt on the beit hadeshen. Va'afilu, last line for this issue, va'afilu Rabbanan lo pli alei de Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, even the rabbis who disagree and think that, right, remember, the rabbis there were the first opinion, they said it's exactly like a korban nidava, and the entire thing gets burnt, there's no kometz or anything. They say that's only b'minchat chotei shel kohanim, tibat hakravihi. That's only when you can theoretically bring the whole thing because it belongs to a kohen. Aval beha afilu rabbanan modu, but this one is much trickier. Why is this trickier? Because this case is a case where we have the woman and the man, and it can't go on the altar because it has the woman is part of it. So because of that, and that's when the rabbis there said the mincha of a kohen sinner gets burnt entirely, that's only because it's just the kohens. In our case, where we have the wife of the kohen also, we have two people here, and it's belonging to both, and it can't be sacrificed because of her element of it. Therefore, they're going to assume, even the rabbis would agree in this case, that it gets burnt on the beit hadeshen. Okay, so we basically have what we did. It was a little bit complicated, and we had to learn a lot of other halachot of minachot. But at this point, what we had is our Mishna says it gets burnt on the beit hadeshen. The braita seemed to say the shirayim, the remainder, actually gets burned on the altar. To which we said either it gets burnt on the altar l'shum eitzim because of the halachic problem, or we say it really doesn't get burnt on the altar at all because of the halachic problem of the mimenu lishi. So we basically say it gets burnt in the beit hadeshen. Now we're on Amud Bet already. Now we're on the fourth line of Amud Bet. We're going to go now back to the Mishnah. And this is the easy part of today's stuff. We're going to just go through one by one all the differences between the kohen and the kohenet. Where do we get it from? Then we're going to go through all the differences between men and women. Where do we get it from? Bat Yisrael and Nisuah kohen, right? This is her mincha, so that we already learned. My time of damar komenchat kohen kalil tia lo teachel. Notice it says kohen velo kohenet. Okay, it's in the male form, not the female form. Now, again, all these drashot are going to be somewhat, or many of them are going to be somewhat problematic because in Hebrew language, the male includes males and females often. So again, this is what I said before. It's more that they knew the halacha and they're trying to connect it to a pasuk, okay? Because you really could darshan it otherwise. Kohenet mitzchalelet, kohene mitzchalel. Minal, and where do we get this from? Damakra, v'lo yechalel zaro obama, zaro mitzchalel, v'hu eno mitzchalel. Again, it says specifically about a kohen who marries someone he's not supposed to marry. This is clear. It's talking about the man, that it messes up his children. Makes it sound like he doesn't get messed up, and that would explain that. Kohen mitamah. She can become impure to dead people. How do we know that? Well, Amarkra, Amorla Kohanim b'nei Aharon. It says the sons of Aaron. This whole commandment of not being impure to dead people. B'nei Aaron below benot Aaron. The sons, but not the daughters. Kohen ochel b'kodshei kodeshim. Here, this one's very clear. Dichtiv kol zachar b'bnei Aaron yochlena. It says the males in Aaron's family, right, of the sons of Aaron, eat it, not the females. Ma bein ish l'isha. So now we get to all the male and female differences. That was all male kohanim versus female kohanim. Ish en li ala ish, isha minayin. So now let's go back to those psukim. Okay, and this is a bit of a strange drasha because it's counterintuitive. But we have these two psukim by Atzarua. Okay, we'll see this in tomorrow's parsha. Vayikra Yud Gimel. Ish pasuk mem daled 44 and 45. Ish tzarua hu tamei yitamenu hakohen b'rosh nig'o. And then it says, so there it says ish. The second pasuk says v'hatzarua, and the leper. Now it already said the ish. You could have just continued and said, without adding this word tzarua. So then it says in the tzarua, asher bo hanega, who has a leper's mark, b'gadav yu prumim, he's supposed to tear his clothes, v'rosho yeparua, okay, etc. So now they say the following. Ish en li ala ish, isha minayin. Ish sounds like only man, not woman. Maybe only men are lepers. Well, because it adds this tzarua, it comes to teach you also women. But so why did you say ish? Ish sounds like only men. Well, ish porea v'chule. Okay, what's weird is they take the word from mem dalid, right? Mem Daled, in Mem Daled, it said ish, only men. Mem He said also women. But then the rest of that pasuk about the begadim and the rosho yeparua, which is juxtaposed to the one that included the women, we're now going to say, though, the ish, the word in the pasuk before, men, comes say men, what we say later in the next pasuk is only true for men and not for women. Okay, so it's a little bit weird because we're limiting the things that are in the pasuk specifically where it includes the women. But again, that's the world of drasha where you have poetic license to darshan it as you want. So ish is going to limit that we don't do that for women. Again, like I said, it's like a which comes first, the chicken or the egg. The halacha or the drasha, probably the halacha came first, and then they just tried to connect it to the pasuk. Where does this come from? That he can force his kid to be a nazir, but the mother can't. Rabbi Yochanan halacha ben nazir. It's a tradition, halacha l'Moshe Sinai, which you might remember. We already learned this. And same thing with the next one. Again, it's a tradition, halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Right, that was the one about the son taking over the sacrifices of the father when the father dies. Okay, the father can marry off the daughter, but not the mother to the son, to the daughter. This is in the section where the husband claims that she wasn't a virgin, even though they had said she was, and it's a financial loss for him because he paid more for her ketubah and all that. And the father comes and brings the sheet or some sort of proof to the rabbis that she actually was a virgin, and he says, I gave my daughter. So because it's a father coming for his daughter, they assume, again, this could go the other way. It doesn't mean only, but they say from here, it must be only the father. The father can sell his daughter into slavery, but not the mother. Again, it says a man to his daughter. Ha'ish niskal arom, my timer. Here the pasuk says v'ragmu oto. When it talks about giving stoning of someone, it says they stone him. My oto, him. Well, ilema oto v'lo ota. What you're going to say? Only men get stoned, women don't get stoned. Pa'aktiv. In a different pasuk it says v'otzeta deishahu o eteshahahi. It says they take out this person or that, right? This man or this woman, which means obviously women can get stoned. So there must be something limited by the word oto. What would that be? Ela oto b'lo ksuto, v'lo ota b'lo ksuta. When they take him out, they ragmu oto, they stone him. They stone him in a way that's different than they stone the woman. He's naked, she is not. Ha'ish nitzle, why is he hung and not her? My time, I'm rakrava talita otole. It's again oto v'lo ota, him and not her. Ha'ish nimkar b'gnevato v'enei shanim keret b'gnevata. She doesn't get sold into slavery. My time, I'm rakrav v'nimkar b'gnevato. Says, and he gets sold from his theft. Again, his theft, bignevato, v'lo bignevatan, not her theft. And with that, Hadran ala chayan hotel. And with that, we finish the third chapter. I'll leave the fourth chapter for tomorrow's daf, where we're going to start a whole new Mishna, a whole new chapter. Okay, quick review of today's daf. We started with the Mishna about different minachot that get disqualified, right? Particularly, we started with the minchat Sotah ones that get disqualified because some reason they end the process. So basically, right, they don't go through the rest of it. They cut it in the middle, so the mincha gets burned in the beit hadeshen. Then we brought up this case of anyone married to a kohen in general, we're going to put the remainder on the beit hadeshen. And then we brought this braita that said something different. It sounded like they get on the altar. And then we had this problem. How could they possibly go on the altar? Once the kometz goes, you can't bring anything else from there. And then we gave two different explanations, either the shumetzim or l'shum, or really it means in the beit hadeshen and not on the altar. Then the Mishna had gone into, since we talked about the difference between the mincha of a kohen, right, who's married to a sotah, whereas what if the woman was a kohenet and a sotah? Those laws wouldn't be true. And therefore, we ended up going into all these differences in halacha between men and women kohanim and men and women in general. And then Gemara went into what's the source for all those differences. That's a quick review of today's stuff. And we got to learn a lot of other halachot about minachot and things that go on the altar. With that, wishing everybody a great Shabbat Shalom and a Chodesh Tov.